Nice full house today. This is exciting. I want to make sure I just give a quick shout out to my friend Francisco, who's just typing in the chat there. I'm so glad you were able to join us, and I'm just as glad to be able to pass the mic over to my friend Ken here. So I feel like I've already known you for some time now, just over the internet, being here in this group. So Ken is famous for his one-handed guitar playing. If you guys have not seen his YouTube videos yet, then I highly recommend you go check them out. And he's going to share a bit about his story, and I hope we get to hear a little bit of guitar playing too, maybe. What do you think?
I hope so too.
Well,
We'll see. I'll pass it over to you though, Ken, and the floor is yours. Yay!
thanks, Ella. Thank you very much. It was great hearing from everybody checking in. We're a group that just has a ton in common. In my case, in the fall of 2011, so quite a while ago, I experienced a stroke. And I'm going to just stop for a second and say, I use the word experienced intentionally. Some people say, I suffered a stroke. And that's a common thing we hear. But to me, that sounds too negative for my way of thinking. I don't like to use that word, but I can't just say I had a stroke because that's a little like I had a stroke, had a coffee this morning, I had, just that word's a little light. So I use the word experienced all the time. And somehow I find the way we talk to ourselves makes a big difference. So on that day, 11 years ago, no, 12, 13, what is it? 12 and a half years ago, I woke up not feeling great. I decided to let work know that I wouldn't be in that day and went back to sleep. When I woke up around midday, um, I had just gotten out of bed for a little moment and I thought things felt super weird. Like I couldn't identify quite what was going on, but it just felt weird. And so I kind of realized that things had stopped working. So I dragged myself, leaning on the wall, leaning on the bed, leaning on the dresser, whatever I could get myself back into bed because that felt safe. And I got to bed and I dialed 911. And when I started talking to that 911 operator, I realized it was even worse than I thought because my speech had become very garbled. I could say the words, but they weren't coming out well. I couldn't physically make my mouth make those words. And so it was very, this corner of my mouth was just out of commission. And my whole right side, for that matter, at that point, was 100% off. And then, I was talking to the 911 operator and I realized, oh my gosh, when my wife left for work this morning, she would have locked the door. And now these guys are going to have to smash their way into the house because the doors are locked. And um, and so why I'm thinking about this stuff while I'm going through probably the worst moment in my life, I don't know. But I managed to say, hey guys, if you put in this code in the garage door, that'll let you in through the garage and then you can come on up and get me. Just weird why I thought of that stuff. I don't know, but I did. So in my case, the one thing I'll explain about the way my stroke occurred was a little different than some other stories, is that the paramedics came up and they were doing their assessments. Can you squeeze my hand? Can you lift your foot? Can you do just all these things that they would do to physically assess what was going on with me? And while we were doing that stuff, all of a sudden, my right side totally healed. It just came back to normal function, normal sensation. Everything worked as though nothing had happened. And I thought to myself, well, that's kind of a weird moment, but hey, we should go get it checked out anyway. So I put my arm around the paramedic's neck. They helped me down the stairs just to make sure I was safe. Walked out the front door, hopped onto the stretcher in my driveway, and off we went to the hospital as though nothing had happened, just a momentary blip. I texted my wife from the back of the ambulance saying, hey, had kind of a weird thing go on this morning, just had in the hospital, no big deal. If you want to come or if you want to, check in, I'll be at such and such a hospital. And thought that was it. Later on in the day, the symptoms recurred. So my right side would all of a sudden lose movement, then it would come back, then it would go away, then it would come back. So it kind of switched on and off maybe 3 times or so. Finally, it turned off for good. And I don't know if I should use the word good, but it turned off. And so that started this experience of what experiencing a stroke is all about. And I spent 2.5 months in the hospital. That was like Christmas and New Year's and a birthday and all that kind of stuff. And eventually got out. I was in a wheelchair at the time. I could use a walker for just a little bit, but in the hospital, I had to learn to, how to speak properly again because my mouth I couldn't speak straight. I couldn't swallow solid food, so I couldn't eat. I had to learn how to eat again. I had to learn how to do a lot of things. The primary relearning for me was I was right-handed, and now my right hand was out of the picture. And so when you have to do everything, one of the things I enjoyed doing in the hospital is I would do a crossword puzzle that would force me to write with my left hand in little tiny squares in the newspaper. And that was, to me, the kind of therapy that I enjoyed because I was able to come up with the answers, but making them fit in those tiny little squares and making the letter S was the hardest. Somehow those dual opposing curves was just almost impossible. So that was my hospital kind of stay. I learned to walk and move and kind of bounce a bit, but I was in tough shape. And my first days at home mostly were on the couch on our main floor because doing the stairs meant having my wife be there to guide my foot onto the next step and with me holding on for dear life onto the handrail. It's really, speaking today kind of forced me to look back on some of this stuff. And it's wild to think of what, we've gone through in the early days and what so many of us have had to contend with a number of things. But when I got into outpatient rehab, I started thinking more about what's going to happen in my life because till that point, my viewpoint was only the next few minutes, the next few hours, maybe tomorrow. I didn't look very far ahead at all. I basically had to just get through my next therapy, then have a nap, and then another appointment, and then have a nap. And so my window was very, very short. And I wasn't thinking very far into the future at all. But once I hit outpatient rehab, it started to become more real. Like, okay, I'm now back in the real world. I now have to contend with all kinds of things. And one of the fun things in my life was music. I've been a musician my whole life, as far as I can remember. So my stroke happened. I was 47 years old, and I had been a musician for 30-something years by that point. And that came about because my mom was a musician. There was always music around the house. There's always a guitar or a fiddle or a banjo or something around the house. And I loved music. But playing guitar tends to be seen as a two-handed pursuit. It's, strum with the right hand, use your fingers on the other hand and make all the notes work. And I just couldn't think of how music was going to continue in my life. And it came down to one therapist. And she asked a fairly innocent question, but she said to me when we were doing goal setting in rehab, she would say, what's your goal? What's your goal? What's your goal? And I'd always say, I got to play guitar again. I got to play guitar again. And she said one day after hearing me say this time and time and time again, her answer was, well, have you ever considered investigating some kind of one-handed technique? And she wasn't a musician, so she didn't know exactly what that would look like. But she understood that that was a worthwhile seed to plant in my head. And for me, it kind of set off a series of kind of like I guess just thinking and then doing. But it was, yeah, you know what? I bet you there is a way to play guitar with one hand. I don't know how it will work. I don't know exactly how it will happen, but I bet you it can happen. I bet you it can be done. And that one therapist planting that one seed meant all the difference to me. And so I started investigating it as I was, going through my recovery and that. And turns out that I did quite a few things differently, but it ended up a few years later in me recording. I don't know if you can see it, but this album. I don't know if you can see that, but I recorded an album because I thought I have to document this. I have to let myself, my future self, and other people know that this is doable and it sounds like actual music. Um, and that was just a huge, huge thing for me. I could accept all kinds of other changes in my life, but having music was a big thing. And it was part of that discussion with that therapist that I think, again, I mentioned at the beginning, talking about how we talk to ourselves, how we frame things, how we set goals. And if I had set my goal to be, I want to play guitar exactly the way I did my whole life, the last 30 something years, then I would have been forever frustrated, forever just, unable to kind of contend with it. But my goal was phrased just a little differently. And what I said was, my goal is to make music with my guitar. By saying it that way, it didn't presuppose that I would have to do it any given way. All I knew is that I could hit it, I could bang it, I could tune it differently, I could do something. But if I could make music with my guitar, that was something that can happen with one hand somehow. And that got me going. So I would say for sure that learning how to phrase our goals to ourselves very specifically makes a huge difference. And so I've now become, it's become a thing for me to play at different events. I do a lot of volunteer work with different health related charities and speak at these events, not to go, wow, look at me, I can play guitar with one hand, but to put that seed in somebody else's head to say, this is something that I previously might have thought of as impossible or just, not something I should even pursue. But I saw this guy do it and it worked. And so maybe that thing that they're hesitating on or that they're thinking they can't pursue because, oh, it's just way too impossible. If somebody can get that little seed planted in their head for whatever it is they're pursuing, then that to me feels like such a huge win. And just that's what fills my heart. So I apologize to Ella that I'm not set up to play today because I would have had to have set up the audio different in my system. I've got a guitar back here that I can show you. So this is my favorite, and I just I play it. I don't know if that comes through at all, but it is. You would, as Ella said, check out YouTube or Instagram or Facebook or whatever. Now I'm tripping over my guitar strap. There we go. Yeah, so it becomes a, you can look at those things online and see it more real. Or I'm also doing a thing. I've been talking to my next kind of upcoming event is the Cordelucci Vaughan Hospital. They've got a stroke event coming up in the springtime. I'm not sure the exact dates of that, but I'll be presenting there and playing there to their crowd. So those are the kind of things that I just love doing. And so if you check out those videos and stuff online, you'll see what it looks like to play guitar with one hand. and maybe get some encouragement for yourself or for somebody else, because it's not just us people that have experienced strokes that need encouraging. There are all kinds of other people out there, in all kinds of circumstances. So that's my thing. I could yammer on and on and on and on, but I was going to send it back to Ella to kind of see where we go from here.
Well, thank you so much, Ken. Seriously, there's a point where when you were talking about, planting that seed of motivation for other people, and I got a little bit teary-eyed, because I could almost like feel maybe what you're feeling, and it's like, oh yes, like that is what it's all about. Like, and when I say it, that's so general, like it being, I don't know, like, isn't it a great feeling to want to improve your life, but then to help other people improve their lives? Like that to me is it. That is my goal. And so to hear you say that so passionately definitely brought a tear to my eye. It was awesome. Um, gosh, where do I start? My absolute favorite thing that you were really hammering home was the way we talk to ourselves. The first thing that you said was, I experienced a stroke. And I was like, that's important. That is so important. I like to say that just like, the toothpaste that you use is marketed in a certain way, in commercials or, slogans, the way we speak to ourselves is marketing for ourselves. The way I talk about Ella, the outcome will be I'm going to like Ella, or maybe I'm going to be sad one day, or I'm not going to like Ella. So, yeah, the way you talk about yourself and your experiences are so important. So, thank you for starting like that. Um, I have to ask, there's a big question I have to ask first. Do you
Sure.
do coaching for a one-handed guitar or lessons?
Not in a formal sense, but I have connected with a number of people who have kind of entered into this one-handed guitar world. There's currently a gentleman in northern Scotland, and he's, experienced a stroke in the last year, and he's kind of getting his guitar playing back in motion. His other hand is the one affected, so he has to play it very differently than I do. But we connect and we share stuff and just encouragement to each other, right? And then there's another gentleman down in Texas, and him and I play very similarly. I actually I got encouragement early on. I was playing, if you guys know the difference, but I was playing bass guitar in a band when this all happened, and so I found a guy in Michigan who plays bass with one hand, and his reason is he had an industrial accident and lost a portion of his right arm. So he plays good, bass with one hand. He is unbelievably good. And again, he was just one of those guys that would say, "Yeah, ask me anything, anything." And this was like the most encouraging, you know, really cool guy. I met another friend, again, another one-handed guitarist from Chile, who, again, his thing was through a childhood accident. He lost part of his right arm, and I had the opportunity to meet him just before the pandemic. Got to meet in person, and it was amazing. And he's just so there's this kind of thing where it's a relatively small world of people that are wanting to play guitar with one hand, but really supportive of each other and encouraging to each other. And that's the thing, right? Like Ellie, you were saying, to take this, arguably crappy thing that happened to us, happened in our lives, and make something good out of it, make something valuable out of it. That is so cool. Like that is, I don't even know what to say. It's awesome.
That's so great. I love that. I love that you have a community of people. Had you seen somebody play guitar with one hand prior to you trying to do that yourself?
No, that's the thing is that so it was in 2011, so kind of, you know, not early-ish days of YouTube and
Mhm.
kind of some of the other social media. So there wasn't a ton of people doing real good content out there. And so I was also one of those people that was, I have to figure this out for myself. I have to figure out my way of doing it. And I do it differently than other people. And what works for me doesn't necessarily work for anybody else. So when I'm trying to share with somebody, I will make sure that I say, hey, this is my thing. If it works for you, great. If not, take what you can, take the little pieces that are relevant and go with them.
Awesome. Cool. Um, I have another big question that I think a lot of stroke survivors have. I hear it all the time, and that is, how do you decide whether the use of your arm, for example, can be improved through therapy, and you would just say, force yourself to play guitar in the traditional way, but you're not as great, or just say, I'm going to compensate. I don't care that I can't use my right arm. I'm not going to really work on it. I'm going to compensate, and I'm going to do it one-handed. How do you kind of make that decision?
Yeah, that is a big question. That is an awesome question because it's not something that I want to answer lightly because truly in my case, I was putting in the early days tons of effort into therapy and I wasn't seeing the results. And but I was, you guys must know, experience this. Therapy made me super tired. Like if I threw my energy into therapy, I had nothing left for the rest of the day or for the rest of my whatever I was doing. And so at some point, and I can't say that I came to it as like a light bulb moment and it was an epiphany. It was just one of those, you know what? I've only got so many waking hours and only so much energy to give and to do. And so am I better to spend that trying to regain some functionality or to learn to be the very best I can be with that one hand? And so for me, and that's a very personal decision. For everybody, it's different. And for other people, they get different results from their therapy. So I don't want it to be encouraging or discouraging to anybody. This is just my own personal experience. And I had to make that decision to say, my the value for me was in pursuing making myself the best left-handed person I could be.
Wow, that's a great answer. A really great answer. Thank you. Actually, as you were talking, in my head, I was saying, wow, this is a great answer. Ken is really, really smart. And so I appreciate that times. I hope everyone else appreciated it as well. I will open the floor now. Again, the recording is still going. If you have a question, I see James already has his hand up. So go for it, James. You can unmute yourself.
All right, fellow guitarist here, except it was my fretting hand that was affected, which makes it tougher, I think. And yeah, I actually tried to reverse my strings and strum with my left hand, which was not easy. So first off, I was wondering if you could share the links to the people that you cited, like the guy from Scotland and the other guy you
Sure.
mentioned. And yeah, and
Let me give you a
yeah,
couple of
what are
names.
some of yeah? And my follow up is, what were some of the big hurdles you had to overcome to start playing it differently?
Okay, so that answers, I like that question. I'll do that one first. So what I did was I decided first of all, so for you non-guitar people, I apologize. We're going to go into a little bit of guitar nerddom here, but that's what you wanted. So here you go, James. I did an open tuning so that if I just strummed all the strings, it would be, in my case, an open C chord. And the reason I did that was I realized that I would be taking advantage of those open strings ringing on to make the sound more full. And so using an open tuning meant that I could never make a mistake that was horrible enough that I couldn't escape from. I could always just pull my hand away and boom, I had this beautiful open chord available, right? So that was one thing. The reason I chose a low C is that I found that the tension of the strings on a normally tuned guitar was going to be too much for me fretting to hammer on and to kind of do all that work, right? So I found that if I used heavier strings but tuned them down lower, there was less tension on the strings, and therefore they were easier to push, but not so easy that they were never staying in tune. So those are kind of two of the main things that I discovered that, again, worked for me in playing guitar. Your first question had to do with, other people, like their links and that.
Yeah.
I would say there's a guy actually that you might be interested in looking at. If you go to Instagram, I think his ID is MPCA. The MPCA underscore. And he's a guy, again, he's one, I don't know if you can see him, he's from Brazil. He's from Florianopolis, Brazil. And he's got one arm missing, but he actually plays the guitar upside down. So the high strings are at the top and the low strings are at the bottom, and he plays it reverse. And so he's figured out a way to do that in a way that really works for him. So normally on a guitar, it's the lowest string, then a little bit higher, all the way up to the, he's flipped that totally upside down and backwards. And that's so cool. And he sings well. He's just a very cool guy to watch. Have you guys found him? Did you find him, Ella?
Yeah, I found
MPCA
him.
underscore.
Yeah, MPCA underscore. I just put it in the chat there. This is pretty awesome.
Yeah, he's an amazing guy. But we've connected a little bit. Like he only speaks Portuguese because he's from Brazil, and I know how to say obrigado, and that's that's the end of my. I have Portuguese, but he's very cool. There's another friend of mine from Chile, called Andres. So Andre with an S on the end. Godoy, Godoy. Unbelievably cool guy. Again, so he plays more my way of playing, but using normal tuning. I got a bunch of them, so I can maybe share with Ella some more later on, and she can shoot them out. So I don't rack my brain trying to remember everybody.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, we'll send a follow-up email with all of them. Yeah.
Yeah, great question though, James. Great question, because I love hearing other guitar players. And you can probably find a way to do it. There's enough of us guys out there that there's an opportunity for you for sure.
Okay, yeah, look into it. Yeah, thank you. And I apologize to everybody who's not a guitar player. We just kind of got into this guitar talk. But I think, Ken, you did a good job just making the discussion accessible or inclusive to everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, I know nothing about guitars, and I understood it because you were like, oh, you explained. Thank you.
Nice.
Awesome. Thank you, James, for that great question. Does anyone else want to ask a question whilst the recording is still on? No. So maybe, actually, I'll ask Ken, while the recording is still on, is there anything that you want to say to sort of conclude to those who watch this after the fact? And then we'll open the floor again for any other questions and comments.
I will say that the biggest lesson I learned through relearning an approach to guitar post-stroke is that there is no right way to do something. There is just another way to do something. And whether that's chopping food in the kitchen with my wrong hand, or whether it's, anything that we have to relearn to do, or just there's no wrong way to do it. There's just your way that works great for you. I think that's a valuable thing to keep in our heads, and that we shouldn't compare our way to somebody else's way.
Love that. What a great way to conclude for those watching online.